Your lab practical standard for this particular unit involves anatomical terminology and using it properly to dissect a model organism. So for the practical, you will be given a non-living thing and you will have to make specific cuts on it and make specific markings on it that show me that you can identify all of the specific regions and terms that are going to be covered in this video. For your standard, it reads, I can properly use the terms that describe relative position, body sections, and body regions, and this covers section 1.8 in your anatomy textbook. Okay, into your notes, Intro.3 Anatomical Terminology. So first is the idea of anatomical position. If we're going to say that some things are above or below, in front of or behind, we have to all agree on how someone is positioned. Are they laying down? How are their arms? Obviously, two-legged organisms and four-legged organisms are going to have vastly different answers to some of these anatomical positioning questions. So we collectively, as an anatomy and physiology community, have agreed that anatomical position is when you're standing straight up, facing forward, your upper limbs are at your sides, and your palms are facing forward. And that is part of it that's a little bit awkward. Most of us, when we stand still, tend to have our palms facing inward towards our thighs. But in anatomical position, we're going to say the palms are facing forward. All right, here are most of the words you need to be familiar with when describing anatomical position, and I'm going to cover them in pairs. So first, superior and inferior refer to things that are above and below. So superior could mean towards the head, inferior meaning towards the ground or towards your feet. All of these examples I'm covering are only for two-legged organisms. These answers would be different for anything with four legs. So examples, the head is superior to the chest cavity, meaning it is above the chest cavity. The foot is inferior to the ankle, so it is below the ankle. Anterior and posterior are words that mean towards the front and back. So anterior would be anything, your face side, your chest, your belly, the front of your legs, your knees. All of those would be anterior features. Posterior, of course, would be towards the back. So your butt, your calves, your back, the back of your head, all of those would be posterior structures. In parentheses here, you'll notice I have two other terms, and that's because on humans, these are synonymous. Ventral, by definition, means on the belly side, and dorsal, like a dorsal fin of a fish, means on the back side. Because we stand up on two legs, our ventral side, our belly side, is the same as our front. You would notice that if this was a cat, the cat's belly would be running parallel to the ground. So the cat's ventral surface is not the same as its anterior, which would be towards the head. Those would run in different planes. But for humans, ventral and dorsal are synonymous with anterior, posterior. The kneecap is anterior to the knee joint because it is in front of. And the kneecap is also ventral to the knee joint. It took me a second. I thought maybe I made a mistake in my video. So the kneecap is also ventral to the knee joint. You could say either. So for some test questions, there may be more than one correct response, which I know you guys love. All right, terms of relative position, now we're covering midline things. So medial and lateral. Medial refers to structures that are more towards the center or midline of an organism. So of course your nose would be a medial structure, your mouth, and then lateral would mean things that are more towards the outside. So your eyes would be more lateral. The outside of your hips would be more lateral. Bilateral are structures that are paired on both sides. So your eyes are bilateral, your lungs are bilateral. Something that's not, for example, would be your spleen. You only have a spleen on your left side. So examples, the nose is medial to the eyes because it is more towards the midline. And the lungs are bilateral to the heart because they are on either side of. Proximal and distal. For these terms, we have to be talking specifically about limbs because in the definition it talks about attachment to the trunk. So proximal means that the structure is closer to the point of attachment than the other structure, and distal means, of course, farther from the point of attachment. There's only two attachment points in the human body. Your arm attachment points would be your shoulder. Your leg attachment points would be your hip. So those are always what we're comparing to. For example, the fingers are distal to the wrist because the fingers are farther away from that attachment point, the shoulder, than the wrist is. If we want a leg example, the thigh is proximal to the calf. So the thigh is closer to that point of attachment than the calf is. Superficial and deep refer to sort of like the outside and the inside of the body. Superficial structures are close to the body surface. Deep structures are more on the inside. Examples, the ribs are superficial to the lungs because the ribs are on the outside of the lungs. They're protecting them. Same thing could be said for your skull. The brain, there we go, is deep to the skull. So the brain is more internal than the skull is. Just to go back for one quick second, I want to highlight the words right and left. You know what those words mean, I hope. The right side of your body and the left side. I just want to be clear that when we're talking about the right or left side, we're talking about of the person who we are studying, or even of the creature, the animal, the subject we're studying. So even though we're looking at this woman here and her hand, this would be on our right, because it is her left, we would refer to this as the left hand. Okay, the other piece of this standard is body sections or planes. There's 3.5 ways we can cut a person. We can cut them sagittally. So a sagittal cut divides the body into right and left portions. So here on this person, it's this teal image. That's the sagittal cut. This, I learned, is derived from the astrological sign Sagittarius, which is the archer. And that kind of helps me remember it, because if you were to pull a bow and arrow back, you would be moving that arrow in a sagittal plane. You'd be moving it front to back. If that doesn't help you, just memorize that sagittal separates right and left. You don't have to be in the direct center to be a sagittal cut. You can be off-centered, but if you are in the center, then that is a mid-sagittal cut. And most creatures have mid-sagittal symmetry, meaning that they're fairly the same on the right and left side if you are right down the middle. Transverse cuts divide the body into superior and inferior portions. I remember this one because it is parallel to the ground. So it is the only one that is a horizontal plane. That is our transverse cut here in orange. And then finally, the frontal cut is sometimes called the coronal cut. I will use both interchangeably. And that cut divides the body into anterior and posterior portions, so it's shown here in blue. Coronal comes from the word crown, and it kind of separates you on the crown of your head as if you were wearing one. Again, if that doesn't help you, anterior, posterior. Pause the video for a sec and see if you can identify the 3 planes that this brain has been cut on. All right, to answer, this first brain has been cut separating the right and left side, but to me I'm thinking, okay, pulling that arrow back, this is a sagittal cut. The second cut here is parallel to the ground, and so that must be a transverse cut. And then the last one separates anterior from posterior. That is a coronal or frontal cut. You will be given pictures of organs and have to identify which cut that organ was made on, but it'll be ones you're more familiar with so that you can be able to make that statement pretty confidently. So this will be assessed in a lab practical setting. I will see you in